Well,
Yep,
welcome
let's go.
everybody to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. I'm your host, Doug Stevenson, and today we're joined by Robert Kennedy III. And Robert Kennedy's got a unique background, and he's going to tell you a little bit about it. So, welcome, Robert.
Thanks, Jug. It's my pleasure to be here, my friend.
Well, it's fun to connect with you. I know we connect on LinkedIn and different platforms, and we have a couple of common themes in our background. I was a
Yeah,
realtor. You're in real estate. I was a realtor for 11 years, made a living, helping people buy and sell houses. You've got a real
yeah.
estate background. You've done a lot of work in real estate training. We both probably use stories in our conversations with our buyers and sellers as well in order to create rapport and build rapport. So the first thing I'd love for you to do is just tell me the story of Robert.
Wow. So the origin story, out of college, I was in the mental health space and I moved from there into teaching. I taught seventh grade for 1 year. Man, lasted for 1 year. Wow. This is tough, 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 tough. Tough group. Yeah. So I moved from seventh grade to high school, and I taught high school for 7 years. While I was doing that, I started a couple of businesses. One of those businesses was an online music promotions business. I started a web company business. And after that, I moved into real estate as well. Once I left education, then I went back into education for 2 years as a college faculty for an online university, started an e-learning company, and then that e-learning company morphed a little bit into a technical training company, and then I started to do leadership training and communication training from there. So business wise, that is the story. My company currently is Kinetic Communications, and the Kinetic is spelled Kennetik, and that comes from a merger between my last name. And when I was teaching in the high school, I taught science, I taught physics, and the physics or the energy of motion is kinetic energy. And so I wanted to relay something that gave a message of enthusiasm, energy. Anytime you enroll or anytime you contract with Kinetic Communications, you're going to get something that is energetic. It's transformative. As a matter of fact, one of the things we like to say is we help people craft and create messages that move people to action.
So your business is in the communication business, helping people not just tell their stories, but
Yeah.
figure out what is it that I want to communicate and how can I do that best using kinetic
Yes.
energy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, not necessarily using kinetic energy, but creating it in a way or sharing it in a way that is confident and connective and allows your audience to vibe and really see themselves in the message that you're sharing.
And story is obviously an integral part of that. I know that you've got the Storytelling Growth Lab and you help
Yeah.
people with their stories. Tell us how you do that. What is your philosophy around storytelling? First, for yourself, when you're in front of an audience, when you're
Yeah.
selling yourself to somebody, what is your philosophy? How do you use stories in your presentations and in your own personal sales?
Well, people, anytime I stand in front of anyone, people want to know, well, who on earth is this guy? Is he real? Is he a myth? Is he a figment of my imagination? And so I want to be able to share information with them that shows them that I'm a human being, that I'm a little bit messy. I've made mistakes just like they have, and I know what it's like to come back from failure or tests or obstacles or mistakes. So I share some of those stories so that I first of all connect as a human being and they know that I'm real just like them and understand the struggles that they have.
What is one of those stories that you tell in front of an audience? Can you pick one out and kind of replay it for us? Because I know you've told the same stories many, many times. So there's one
Wow.
of them that's probably sitting right there, ready to go.
Man, there are a lot of stories that I use. There was a story I shared some years ago with a mastermind group, and they were like, dude, why haven't you told this story before? And I didn't think it was a big deal. And it was a story about me learning to ride my bicycle. I learned to ride my bicycle at the age of 8. I was in the state, not the state, in the country of Canada. And I was with a friend, and we were at home at his house. I said this day, I want to learn how to ride my bicycle, because I was from the island of Jamaica where I was born. Most kids at my age didn't have bicycles. I wanted to learn a bike to ride that day. And he said, okay, he pointed outside. He said, this is how you learn how to ride. And I looked out the window, and there were kids out there on their bikes, but their parents were pushing them behind. They were pushing the bicycles along to teach them. This was back in the day when you could leave 8-year-olds at home without any repercussion. There were no parents at our house that day. And so we decided we were going to just jump out onto the street. He took his bike. I got his sister's bike with the bell, the pink basket on the front. And we started to ride down the street. He takes off. And of course, I don't know how to ride, so I fall. And he's still riding. I'm there struggling, figuring out how to ride this bicycle. I don't know how I figured this out, but his driveway was a driveway that was on the decline and it went into the garage, which was underneath the house. I figured that if I coasted the bike down that hill into the driveway, into the garage, I could balance a little bit better. And I did that for a little while. Did it over and over for probably for about 30 minutes or so. And as I felt comfortable to gain my balance, I started putting my feet on the pedals and turning in the garage. After a little bit, I decided I was ready to go on the road. I went on the road, rode a few feet, and fell over on the bike. Hadn't learned how to fully balance yet. But at the end of the street, I noticed that there was a hill. So I pushed the bike over to the top of the hill, and I perched the bike at the top of the hill, pushed off, and this bike started to go down the hill. Bike started to pick up speed, and I felt a little bit comfortable, and so I put my feet on the pedals. And the pedals started to turn, and they started to go faster and faster and faster. And after a while, you can imagine the pedals started to go so fast that my feet flew off the pedals and I couldn't keep up with it. This bike is going down this hill. And oh, by the way, there's an intersection coming up at the bottom of this hill.
Oh, my goodness.
And about 2/3 of the way down this hill, I remembered that there was something I forgot to teach myself in the driveway. How to stop. I forgot to teach myself how to hit the brakes. And this intersection is coming up faster and faster and faster. And on my left-hand side, I notice that there's a house and there's a lawn. And I swing the bike and I throw it over onto the lawn. I fly off the bike, go through the grass and hit some fences, picket fences, and get mud and dirt and grass all over my face. And everything stops. As everything stops, I look up at the top of the hill and I see my friend and I see his face. And he's got the Home Alone face, hands up there like, oh my gosh, what happened? And he's scared and he's freaked out. But I get up and I stand and I raise my hands like Rocky at the top of the stairs in Philadelphia because I'm saying, oh my gosh, I rode my bike down the hill. Now, I tell that story in a lot of different places because I share a lot of lessons from it. One is perspective. Everybody else looking on says, oh my gosh, you failed, you messed up, you crashed. In my perspective, I rode my bike. I succeeded. I had a champion's mindset. I had something amazing that happened to me that day. And there are so many different lessons that I pull out of that. I speak in front of project managers. We could talk about how the project feels out of control as the bike pedals start to spin and your feet fly off. There's so many lessons we pull out of that. And that was why my mastermind team said, dude, why have you not shared this story before? Because of all the lessons that we were able to pull out of that.
Well, I love that story. And first of all, for the joy that I experienced listening to it, because it was a lot of fun. It was very visual. I could see it. I could experience it. I could watch it. And I did physically get emotional. I got tense when you were going down that hill and the intersection was coming. So that's part of the power of story is how much it involves the audience. It's called a mirror neuron response. The mirror neurons are flying in my body as you're going through your story. But of course, as you're going through the story, the question that I have and the question audiences have is, what's the point? What are you going to use this to teach? And I love how you say, well, for project managers, I can angle it in this direction about how the project can be getting out of control. For a different audience, I could choose a different point. Now, I'm hoping that you agree with me that when you tell that story in front of project managers, you only use it to teach the point that's applicable to project managers. And when you shift to another audience, you only use it to make the point that's applicable to real estate professionals or whatever. So one story can make multiple points.
Yeah. And I tell it differently depending on the audience. There's some parts of the story that I'll lean into more is as we speak to a project manager audience. I'll do the setup, but I'll really lean into that session of going down the hill. I may not tell them about, being 8 years old and all of the different things that are happening in the house with my friend. But if I'm speaking to a group of teachers, or I'm speaking with people who deal with children or teenagers, I'll lean into the part of the mindset of 8-year-olds, where we can see the challenge or all the different elements that go around learning a new skill. So there are a lot of different ways that we phrase and lean into the story depending on who we're speaking to.
Well, I love the way that you talk about that, because the foundation is you have a story about learning how to ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
And there are elements of it that you can bring out or delete. You can put them in or remove them based on the audience that's there. But the foundational story is the story of being an 8-year-old learning to ride a bike.
Yep.
I love the details. I love the different details that go in, because when you talk about, here I am in Canada, but I was raised in Jamaica, and in Jamaica, nobody had a bike, but here I am in Canada and everybody's out there riding bikes. Those kinds of things are interesting details as well. And I love those. Those are human details. That's a subtle way of saying, hi, I'm Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
And I might be a little bit different than you because I grew up in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And I love those kinds of things, because I'll occasionally slide in, that I grew up in inner city Chicago, just so that people understand, oh, that's his foundation.
Yeah.
That's something that influences where he's coming from and the choices he makes. So now when you're teaching other people stories, so that's a story that you tell.
Yeah.
How do you help other people identify their stories?
One of the common challenges for a lot of people is they feel like they don't have a story to tell. They don't have
that a lot.
a big enough. Yeah. Yeah. They think that the stories that they have to tell are the big dramatic ones. Oh, I was driving and I had an accident and this happened in the accident, something very traumatic. And it's not always. I start with, what are some of the places in your life that you had to do something different? What was the time that you had to take a test? It may have been the driving exam that you had to take, or your road test. What was a place where you had to learn a new skill? Okay, I got this job and I had to learn how to use a new program for work. What was a challenge that you had when you went shopping? Oh, I couldn't find the right shirt. I couldn't find the right size clothing. How did you deal with that? So we walk through the fact that everybody has stories. Everybody has stories that are not just relevant, but amazing stories. And it really comes down to two things. Number one, what's the lesson that you can pull from that story?
Yes.
And number two, how do you use that lesson to connect with an emotion inside of somebody else that allows them to see themselves in the story, or find something that connects in their own personal life to that story? So that's where I start.
Yeah, I talk about finding the obstacles and challenges and big and small disasters in your life, and building stories around those obstacles and challenges. And you call them tests. Actually,
Yes.
this is a new way of thinking about it for me, because when did you have to take a test? Well, it's not just sitting down to take a math test or a test in school. When did you face a test in your life? It's kind of a metaphor for a lot of bigger things. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the challenges that people have in attempting to think about their story is they live life and they don't capture it enough. There's a book by Matthew Dix called Storyworthy. One of the ideas inside of that is this practice that he has. At the end of every day, he sits down and he writes 5 things that happened that day, puts them down on paper, and then he draws a line, and on the other side in another column, he writes, what's the lesson that could be learned from this? And maybe he uses some of those stories, maybe he doesn't use them, but he has this vault to pick from, and he's practicing. He's using that muscle regularly of looking back, figuring out what was an experience and what was a story and what he can pull from that. So now anytime he speaks, anytime he's in front of someone, anytime he's having conversation, he's got this treasure trove to pull from that he's familiar with, because he's continually practicing capturing those stories and those experiences.
Yeah, I like the idea of developing your story muscle.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I think for storytellers like you and I, we see story everywhere. I mean,
Right.
anything can happen, and I can see it, and it's like, oh, that could be a story. But I immediately stop myself and go, okay, fine, yes, that's potentially a good story to tell if I can figure out what's the point or the message that would be relevant to somebody else that fits into what it is that I do for a living. Because I teach storytelling for a living. I
Right.
coach people on stories for a living. So if something happens to me, my question is, how does that illustrate something about storytelling? Finding a story, developing a story, finding the message of a story. Because I've got a couple of stories that have just fascinating things that have happened in my life, and I can't use them. It's that they're just like, that was funny. That was interesting. Have no reason to tell that story other than it's funny. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just telling a funny story without a point is not okay because we're in business. We're using stories to influence, to persuade. And I know you talk a lot about stories to influence. So fill that in a little bit more. Stories to
Yeah.
influence. Talk about that.
Well, one of the ideas you asked me about was you asked me to tell about myself, and you used a specific word. You said, "Tell us your origin story." Now, what is that, and how does that help people? Well, an origin story is not necessarily where you come from, or it's not from the day that you were born, but it may be the origin of an idea that you have, or an idea that you're passionate about, or whatever you're working on. So if there is something that you're doing, where did that start? What was the pivotal moment that brought that to life? And how can you use that pivotal moment to connect with people? And businesses do this all the time. There's a company called Warby Parker. If you know anything about glasses, or maybe if you've worn glasses, you've heard of the company Warby Parker. If you go to warbyparker.com, go to their website and check out their About page. Their About page has an origin story on it. And the story goes something like this. There were some college kids who went camping, and on day 1 or day 2 of the camping trip, one of them was hiking and dropped their glasses, and somebody stepped on them. Now, they had to go through the rest of the camping trip without glasses, but then they got back to school and tried to get new glasses, but the glasses were too expensive for broke college kids. So they spent the rest of the semester squinting and struggling to get through the year. And that was a moment that they resolved that no one else would have to pay exorbitant amounts for glasses in order to live life. Right. So that's an origin story. It tells why they do what they do, why they're passionate about what they do. And anybody who's ever had the experience of, oh my gosh, I need this, but it costs too much, is going to connect with that story. So having an origin story, or understanding how a story that is part of your life, or where you've come from, connects with people and business and things that they need, is really something that I believe every business owner should capture.
And I've also discovered that, as you say, an origin story can be the origin of your business model, the origin of your life path, the origin of your methodology. And it's audience specific sometimes in terms of what origin story do I want to develop? Because I can tell the entire story of my life growing up in Chicago and hitchhiking to Hollywood and all that. It's like, well, yeah, but that's not going to be relevant to a lot of people. That's extraneous. That's interesting.
Right.
That's interesting about, well, Doug's really nuts and crazy and he was an actor in Hollywood. Fine. So what? So what? What does that got to do with anything? So I might look at the person I'm speaking to and say, what do they need to hear? What part of my origin story? Because I've got a lot. You've got a lot. We've all got a lot. We've got this entire history. What aspect of my business model do I want to figure out an origin story for, to tell somebody about that? So with your business model around storytelling, I'm sure it's evolved over the years, just like mine. Because I started teaching storytelling 25 years ago. And in the first 6 or 7 years, it kept growing and evolving and getting better and better, because people would ask me a question that I didn't have an answer to.
Yeah.
Or we would do something and somebody'd say, "Ooh, that was a cool technique. What do you call that?" And it evolved and developed. How about you? Have you seen your methodology and your approach to helping people with stories evolve and grow and change over the years? And if so, let's hear about it.
Yeah, I believe we are similar in this word, strategic storytelling, or this phrase, because when I started in this, it was more so about how can I share my story with the world? How can I get people to listen to what I have to say? And over time, it became more about not just getting people to listen to what you have to say, but utilizing the right story, the right strategic story, in the right circumstance to really appeal to what is happening or what's most relevant to people at that specific time. So one of the things that I leaned into was three P's. I leaned into stories about product, process, and partnership. So if somebody is interested in buying something, you may be telling them a story about how that particular product has been, or results that people have gotten from utilizing that particular product, right? It doesn't make sense for me to tell them how the product was made because they don't care about that. They want to know about the results, right? So then there's the process. Somebody may be walking through a specific journey. Let's say that they're looking to purchase a car. Okay, cool. The car is nice, but how is the car made, or how has it performed for people? Or maybe, is this a car that will last for 10 years, or how should I treat it in order for it to last 10 years? So you may say to someone, okay, well, these cars are nice. In order to get it last 10 years, here are the maintenance schedules, or here's what somebody who's owned one for 15 years has done. So you're sharing with them the process, not just that it's a car and it's got these particular features. You're sharing the process that has taken place in order for them to get the actual result that they want. So, I share just those particular types of stories, strategic stories, in order to really connect with the situation and the circumstance that the audience is facing at that particular time.
Have you ever worked with somebody and they come to you and they've got a story, and you listen to the story, and at the end of the story you say, no,
Yeah.
no, that's not your story. Let's go deeper. Because a
Yep.
lot of times with my students, they'll come in and they'll give me a story that they think I want to hear, that they think is cute or funny or interesting, but it's not deep enough. It doesn't reveal anything. It's not emotionally connecting. It doesn't have an emotional connective tissue. And I say, no,
Right.
no, no. Okay. So do you run into that occasionally where somebody tells you a cute little story and you go, oh, come on. Come on, let's
Yeah.
go. Let's go. Come on, tell me something more vulnerable, more real,
Yeah.
more challenging, where you really had to fight your way through something. Because that's where
Yeah.
people get engaged. They get engaged in the drama of, I ran into this issue, this problem, and I really had to dig deep to figure out how I was going to solve this problem.
Yeah, I run into that all the time. And what I also run into is the order in which people decide to share stories. So I got a request from a family member about an essay that they were submitting to a school that they would like to enter. And at the beginning, they had this information about what they liked. I like baking. I like baking because baking, I relate that to to offering therapy to people. And they went through this list. They had about 2 paragraphs on this. And then in the third paragraph, they started to talk about how they came into the love of baking through spending time with her grandmother and her mother and not being able to see what was in the baking bowl. I said, why didn't we start there? Why did we lean into the emotion of childhood first? Because everybody's been a child. Everybody's had the experience of not being able to have access or not being able to see something. Either they weren't tall enough to see it, or they just weren't old enough to have the permission for it. Lean into that, connect with people, figure out how you can get that emotion happening, how you can have the oxytocin and the cortisol moving before you now start to share information. Because I like to say that stories, and especially in the workspace and especially in the business space, it's more about transformation than it is information.
Now that is gold. It's more about transformation than information. And I think that's where you and I live, and storytellers
Yeah.
live, is we understand The power of story for transformation. That doesn't mean inside that story there isn't good information about process,
Right.
about a sequence of actions that people can follow and, see that. But I love the idea of transformation rather than information, because the people that come to me and that come to you, they're suffering from information overload. They are too dependent on data and content and information, and they think that that's going to get them by until they get so ruined by it, have so many failures, look out at audiences that are bored to tears, get a 360 evaluation that says, you know what, you're a really good employee and you really know your stuff, but you can't present for squat. When you get to the front of the room, you're just terrible. You need to tell a story. Go talk to Robert.
Right.
Go sit down with Robert and let him help you find your stories, because what we need to do is take people away from their preoccupation with content ideas and their busy life when we make a presentation. Yeah. I believe my first job is to grab them, pull them away from where they are, preoccupied with their life and their emails, grab them, pull them away with my story, and then I can teach them something. But if they're sitting there and they're still checking emails, I can't transform them.
We've got to release ourselves from something. When we're in front of people, quite often we want to seem smart. We want to seem like the most knowledgeable person in the room. And we believe that the way to do that is by chucking data and numbers at
and
people.
Quotes.
And here's where we want to release ourselves. Most of the stuff that you said in that presentation, they're not going to remember anyway. So why not build your everything around one point or one big idea or one item that you want them to really walk away with and move to action on? Everything else around it is a supporting element, right? And so if I'm sharing a story, the point of that story is not to have the people remember the story, but the story is a supporting element for a point, an idea, something that you want them to walk away with and be transformed by, or decide, you know what, I'm going to complete this project. Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to change my life. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to do something, but that is propped up by the emotion and the story that you told that connected with them, so that now they're able to physically feel it and remember it.
So I want to shift a little bit into your book, Find Your Voice, because I think one of the greatest challenges for people who want to be better at the front of the room, giving a speech, giving a presentation, regardless of the size or the venue, we got to find our voice. What do you mean when you say find your voice?
Your authentic voice, what comes from within you, that is not a copy of somebody else. I'm going to refer to another book outside of mine. There's a book that is called The Courage to Be Disliked. I love the title and I love what it talks about, because myself included, quite often we perform or we act or we speak because we are trying to be liked. We want to say things in a way where people will pat us on the back and say, oh my gosh, that was the greatest thing ever. Attaboy, attagirl, whatever they want to say about us. We want them to like us. So finding your voice means that sometimes you're going to share a perspective, you're going to share a story, you're going to share something that either the vast majority of people don't agree with, or a segment of people think is insane, crazy, whatever it is, but you have the courage to say it because you're comfortable with your voice. You have owned your voice. You found it and you're saying, you know what? This is me. This is my story. I'm telling it. This is the way that I'm expressing it. Not that you are reckless and you're just insulting people because you feel like it, but you're sharing information in a way that is true to you. And once you have been able to own that and find that, you'll find that the way that people respond in rooms is so much more just, I don't even know what the word that I want to use is, but it's freeing for them. They're liberated by your freedom.
Well, so when I've watched videos of you, it looks like you're pretty liberated in front of an audience. You're kind of wild and crazy up there. You're having
I like
fun.
to
You're,
have
you're,
fun.
you're being pretty darn loose. Were you always that loose, or did it take a while for you to get out of your own way?
It took a while for me to get out of my own way
Me too.
because
Me too.
I did not I did not think that people would accept fun or crazy or wild in the corporate world. I was told that people in the corporate world are a certain way, especially if you're talking to specific groups of people. If you're talking to lawyers, if you're talking to financial professionals, they're logical, they're type A, they're stiff, they're rigid, they're this way. And so you've got to present in a specific way. You've got to have content. They've got to make sense of it. It's got to be logical for them. And so to be someone who felt like, you know what, I like music. I like to dance a little bit. I like to move a little bit. I like to throw my hands in the air and wave them like I just don't care sometimes. Right? It took a while for me to get to the space where I said, wait a minute, I'm human just like these people, and whatever labels people have put on them, they too, whether they admit it always or not, they too have emotions. They have stuff that they like. They have stuff that they hate. They laugh sometimes. They cry sometimes. And because they're human and they have those emotions, what can I do to tap into those so that we can then connect? That's the whole point behind my story, my energy, and doing what I do.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to eventually step out of your own way into
Mhm.
your authenticity, and to dance and to sing and to move and be silly and crazy, and to not limit yourself by your perception of what they want from you, but to take them to where you are so that they can get out of where they are and come into where you are, which is a joyous, happy, wild, and crazy place. To not speak to their role, but to
Right.
speak to their humanity.
Oh my God. I love that. Yes, absolutely.
I think we've both, over the years, released ourselves into the magnificence and uniqueness of who we are. And that's what's made us successful. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I'm still learning. I'm still on this journey of digging in and finding out who I am and how I can impact people even more. But man, the journey to this point has been fascinating and phenomenal. I've loved it.
Now, are you a full-time professional speaker at this point, or do you also do coaching and corporate training and what else?
I don't do a lot of coaching. I do groups. So, for example, I've done cohorts of real estate professionals who are looking to get better on camera, who are looking to communicate more effectively and get rid of some of the anxiety and the nerves and show up in that way. I do some of that. I do some corporate training, but most of what I do is workshops at conventions, conferences, associations, brokerages. I run workshops or do keynotes for that.
What is your favorite? Do you love to do keynotes, or do you love to do training?
I prefer trainings. I prefer trainings for a couple of reasons. Number one, I get to see people apply some of the concepts in a training and I see the transformation. Keynotes are 45, 60 minutes. And yes, I do what I call I do what I call an interactive keynote. I'm not typically talking for 60 minutes. I have people get up, I have them do specific things, and especially in smaller rooms, I have them talk back to me. They're talking. We're having a conversation. But when I have a training and when I have them for 2 hours or 3 hours, a lot of peer learning happens inside of that. I'm a facilitator. I'm a guide. I give them a concept. I give them something to think about, and then they're able to apply it. And we're able to hear and share the results. I love that.
When you do a keynote, you do your version of a teaching keynote, an interactive
Yes.
keynote. And so I want people
Yes.
to hear this. There isn't one way to do a keynote.
No.
There are a million ways to do a keynote based on how do you want to do it. Now, you're going to have to work it out over the time, because if they give you 45 minutes, you can't do a 20-minute exercise and expect that you're going to
No.
finish in 45 minutes. It's like you've got to learn over time. And it's called stage time. Darren LaCroix calls it stage time. And I absolutely agree. The more time you spend in front of an audience, the more time you tell a story, you learn as you go. And so I want
Yeah.
everybody to understand this. Robert learned as he went. I
Yep.
learned as I went. I didn't get up in front of an audience the first time and have it nailed. I've often felt that any presentation in a room full of people is a once in a moment organic experience. It's like a living being.
Yes.
And that combination of you and that room full of people and your content, your ideas, and their exchange of energies with you, that is a one-time event that will
Yeah.
never be replicated, because the concept of audience is a construct in our mind that if you're speaking in front of 350 people, they don't see themselves as audience. There are 350 individual people relating to you individually at that moment in time. And therefore, this concept of, well, I want to do this for my audience, you're going to get in front of a room full of people and you're going to have to discover it as you go. Because some audiences are dead. And that is the worst. And some audiences are
Yeah.
just lively, lively, lively. But you've got to rely on your technique in order
Yeah.
to just be the same person pretty much every time, in terms of the same level of, I'm going to commit to what I'm going to do and I'm going to deliver this. And if you give me a lot of feedback and energy, great. And if you don't give me a lot of feedback, I'm not going to lose energy based on you not giving me energy.
That's
I'm
it.
going to
I
maintain
love it.
my level. And I learned that from
Yep.
watching, people in rock and roll and singers and performers who's like, they just get up there every night and they just kick ass.
Yep.
And they're not
Yep.
dependent on the audience giving them anything or not. They just know, this is our set. This is what we're doing. Let's go. And I believe my
Yeah.
stories, this is like my set,
Yeah.
like
Give
my
yourself
music.
some grace as well. I say to people, give yourself a little bit of grace. There are times where I'll tell a story or I'll say something that I think is hilarious in front of an audience. And the first time I told it, it killed. Everybody is in uproar, in an uproar, man. And then I tell it again or I do it again and I get crickets. And sometimes that happens and I'll just start laughing myself. Or I'll say out loud, you know what? I thought that was hilarious. That was funny to me, and I and I would laugh. And sometimes people will laugh at the fact that I'm laughing, and not necessarily at the story or the joke. But the whole point is to get the laughter, to get them laughing, to get them outside of their docile state or their wherever they are, change their state to laughing or crying or reflection or whatever it is. Anytime you can change the baseline state of where people are, you've done a great job.
It is, it's quite the challenge to be a speaker and a presenter and a trainer, isn't it?
It is. It is. But it's a beautiful journey.
What would you say to people who are listening to this and they're not presenters yet, but they want to be? They're not
Mhm.
speakers yet, but they want to be. Some of them might want to become professional speakers. They might want to make a living at it, but they're not quite sure what it is that I'm supposed to do at the front of the room. What is that secret to being able to be at the front of the room and be so compelling and interesting that people want to pay you to do it? How would you
Yeah.
answer that question to some of these people listening that are just, they're kind of out there on the fringes going, I want to dip my toe in the water, but I'm not sure how to do it.
Yeah. There are a lot, it's a nuanced answer. There are a lot of layers. So is it that you want to become better at speaking or do you want to be a professional speaker? And in both cases, you still got to start with the baseline of the skill or the practice of speaking. And so for some people, it's as simple as starting out by going to Toastmasters and making sure that you've got the skill locked in. And once you have that locked in, then joining a group like the National Speakers Association that can help you with the business of speaking. But at the base of all of that, it's about repetition. It's about doing the thing that you say you want to do and doing it in public. Right. And so we live in a great time. We live in the 21st century where you have no shortage of opportunities to practice. And that practice may simply be you flicking your camera on, hitting that record button and going live on Facebook or LinkedIn, or whatever it is. I do a show every Monday morning at 8 a.m. And most of my audience doesn't know this, But part of the reason I do it is because I'm trying out material. I'm practicing stuff. I'm telling stories that I may have not told before. I'm messing with concepts that I haven't messed with before. It's forcing me to practice in public. And so, can you practice in public? You have plenty of opportunities and resources to be able to do that. So grab your courage and jump in.
I love the idea of grab your courage, because um, people that are afraid that they're going to make a mistake at the front of the room, I will guarantee you're going to make a mistake at the front of the room. You're going to make a mistake. You're going to mess up. But the only way to get better is to get at the front of the room. The only way to learn how to be a speaker is to be at the front of the room, exchanging energy with an audience, trying things out, figuring it out. I mean, that's why Broadway plays, they create the Broadway play and then they do it, off in Connecticut or someplace. They don't start on Broadway. They go to Connecticut. They go to, someplace and they try it out in front of an audience somewhere to work out the kinks. And then they come back and they rewrite it. So we have to learn by doing. The only way to learn, and nowadays with the internet and with people doing videos and stuff, it's like this is a great way to hide what we're doing right now. If this is it, this is a great way to hide, because I can be here in my house and I can be speaking to you and you can be speaking to me, but that doesn't mean I can get up in front of 500 people and hold their attention and kick ass and be amazing and get people to pay me to do it. The only way I learned to do that is I got up and I started to say, I want to be a speaker. Where can I speak?
That's right.
Well, there's an Optimist Club. There's a Rotary Club. There's a Lions Club. There's a luncheon. There's a sales enablers group. There's all of these different groups in town at breakfast and at lunch and at dinner. And I can speak at all of those for free. And by getting up there and doing that, I learned how to do it. And eventually people would say, oh, that story, that was really good.
Yeah.
Oh, and they teach me. They teach me what my material is. Would you agree that your audiences help you to define what's your best stuff?
Absolutely. All the time. You're collecting data while you're on stage. You're seeing how they respond. And the data is not simply about, are they enjoying it in this moment? Am I doing well? Am I doing good? It's more than that. It's okay. They responded, or this particular audience that's made up of this group of people responded in this way to this particular thing. You might tell the same story and one group responds to the first third of the story and another group responds to the third of the story. And that doesn't mean the story was bad. It's just data now that says, okay, I may want to lean in or share this story in this way, highlight this part because it works really well for this group. And this part works really well for this group. So you're collecting data as you're up there, and maybe you're not collecting it while you're there because you want to be present and in the moment. But if your speech is being recorded, sidebar, always record your speach. Whenever you speak for free or whatever it is, get it recorded. Whether that's your son, your daughter, your friend, your BFF that has a cell phone, whatever it is, record it and then watch it, so that you can collect some data about yourself and the audience and how they responded to what you were saying.
And I would also encourage people to be careful about who you receive feedback from and take to heart, because there are people who will give you feedback who do have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
There are people who say, you got emotional up there and you should never get emotional. You should never be emotional. It's like, what? Just because you don't like people being emotional, nobody should ever be emotional. Just because you stuff your emotions, I should stuff mine. So you've got to be careful about taking feedback from people who can give you objective, constructive feedback that is helpful, rather than feedback that shuts you down. Because at the beginning, we're kind of tender. Kind of vulnerable in those first 5, 10, 15, 20 speeches. We're kind of vulnerable because we're like, is this who I want to be? Is this my voice? Is this my story? Is this my opening? Is this my closing? How's it working? And I can just visualize some of those early rooms, speaking in the back room of a Denny's at lunch while they're serving lunch. At some kind of meeting. And I figured, if I can hold people's attention when their real agenda is to eat lunch with each other, if I can somehow hold their attention for 20 minutes, if I can learn how to do this, then when I get paid to speak in front of 600 people and they're all paying attention to me, that's going to be a piece of cake. And so there's there's kind of a proving ground.
Yeah. I would add
Just
one
get up at the
thing
front
as
of the
well,
room.
especially when you're starting out. It can be challenging if you're creating a new speech every single time you speak.
Uh-huh.
So early on, can you craft something, a story or a speech that you can repeat and do
Yes.
over and over again
Thank you.
until you've nailed it,
Thank you.
until you're comfortable with it and you can say it backwards and forwards in your sleep? Can you do that? Because getting those reps is crucial. It's important. And you just mentioned sometimes people give you bad feedback. But if you are saying the same speech in front of varying audiences and you now have the ability to get feedback about the same thing from a greater group or a greater number of people. So you can validate things a little bit more that way as well.
Yeah, and I'd also encourage people to learn the lesson that you and I have learned is if you have a really rocking story, a really great story, and you've developed it and you can replicate it time after time after time, and you get hired by a group of people to tell your speech, and somebody comes up and says, I love that speech and I love that particular story. I would like to recommend you to another group. And then you think, well, I can't tell the same story to that next group. Wrong. They want that story for the next group. And here's the challenge. They want it exactly the same as they heard it, which means you better figure out what that story is. Perhaps you need to script it and memorize it like I do and get it down so that you can replicate it at least 95% the same. Because if you tell it brilliantly in front of audience A, they hire you to give it in front of audience B, and you get up and you mess it up, that person who hired you is going to be really pissed. They're going to be really disappointed because, like, you left out the part of the story that I hired you for. And
Right.
you don't know what that was until they tell you, you forgot the sentence. It's like, you're paying that much attention? Yeah, they are.
So maybe the question as well is if you happen to get that type of a referral and they say, hey, I love this story and I want to refer you. Now your question is, what was the part that you loved the most?
Yes.
Or what did you really enjoy? Or what section resonated with you?
Yeah.
Get them to give you that data as well so that when you go in front of that new audience, you've got that information in your back pocket.
Well, Robert, this has been a joy to spend this time with you and have this exchange of energy and wisdom and knowledge, which only comes from stage time. It only comes from getting up there and being brave enough to find your voice and tell your stories and try and fail and try again and succeed and learn. So thank you so much for the wisdom that you shared today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me on, Doug. I really appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.